Well, hello, hello. Welcome to Birthing the Gifts. I am clinical psychologist Dr. Kyla Holmes, and here at Birthing the Gifts, we provide a safe and compassionate space to grow your God-given gifts. In this interview series, we've discussed a range of things. I've talked to individual people, we've talked to parents, we just talked to a number of people about the process of giving birth to your gifts. So today we have with us my aunt, Dr. LaVerne Bell-Tolliver. So thank you for joining us today, Aunt LaVerne. I will probably, of course, refer to you as Aunt LaVerne, but of course, we want the people to know, and we'll talk about that, of course, throughout all of what you have done. So, of course, the doctor represents your part of your journey and a part of who you are and part of how you impact the kingdom. So thank you for joining today. And as we talked about before, I like to give a little bit of an overview as to why I asked, who I asked to come on this platform. So I was thinking, man, there's so many different reasons why why I've asked you. But I think the part that I want to focus on is like, so for me in my life, when people kind of ask me what has helped me, right? What has helped me? What has encouraged me, what has been a part of kind of what made me be able to do the things that I do personally and professionally. Of course, I say God because you can't not to give
Amen.
honor to God. And then I have to say family. I have to say family. Because as you know, one thing that I talk a lot about is the image and the illustration of a tree and how a tree can be symbolic of being anchored and rooted, even when life current tosses us around every which way. Hopefully, is something that could keep us anchored and rooted, or have us feel some sense of security and stability. So for me, in part, that has been family. So, I really had to think about that. No family is perfect, while at the same time, we have a lot of strengths in our family. And so I couldn't continue with this series without giving voice to that and without having a conversation with this is just from my vantage point, different people in my family that I feel have been a part of that anchoring, if you will,
Yeah.
and have contributed to that anchoring. So that's why that's what that's about. That's what that's about is really giving voice to what I feel like has contributed to my resilience, which is family. So this is what this is about. This is what brings you here. And so if I were to think about you, LaVerne, I would think about a number of things that's in your gift package. Well, before we jump into that, again, welcome.
Thank
And
you
thank you for
so
being
much. And I'll say niece Kyla. Sometimes I say niece Dr. Kyla. It's good to be here. I'm honored and I feel grateful and privileged to be here. What a pleasure.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, hey, like I always say, I really do think it's so many things that come to mind when I think about all of what can be in your gift package. I'm just kind of looking at my little notes here, but we can talk about ministry. We can talk about mental health and social work. We can talk about being an author. We can talk about being what I want to call it, very active and a mover and shaker in the community. We can talk about all sorts of things, but like one way that I usually do it, and we don't have to do it this way, is to talk about your process of birthing your gifts and kind of in a chronological way. So I don't know. So usually that's how I try to start it. Is kind of when well let me kind of ask you this though. Like before we kind of get into the chronology, that's what came to my mind when I thought about you and your gift package. What am I missing? Let's maybe start there so we can make sure we talk about it. What am I missing when you think about you and what your gifts are and what you bring to the community, to the body of Christ? What am I missing in that list?
Well, I think that you pretty much covered it, but I think last night when I was thinking about this interview, for some reason, an onion came to mind, and that's sort of peeling the layers, that make me who I am. And an onion is not developed alone, so there are many other aspects that contribute to the onion, just like you talked about family and all of that. And so I think in our discussion, we'll probably uncover some other aspects of what made me who I am and all of that, and what we're missing or not missing.
Mhm.
I think you did it
Mhm.
so well. So I like
Okay.
the way that you're going to lead us, and so I'm willing to be that pliant subject today.
I see. I see. Well, I love that analogy though of the onion and continuing and peel the layers of all of what makes us who we are because we have all these different dimensions to us and
That's
you
right.
would know better than me, but I feel like it's some what is it some scripture maybe in Psalms is one particular interpretation of it or translation that talks about how God made us so beautifully like complex or something like that
Yeah,
is the one that
yeah.
we're beautifully and wonderfully made,
Yeah,
but is
Psalm
another translation
139. Psalm
on 139.
139 is that particular scripture, and it does talk about being beautifully and wonderfully made from our mother's womb, and
Mhm, mhm,
just deep in the dark, God was
mhm.
about his work, and yet,
Right.
even at the same time, he knew our minutes, our days, our hours, our years to the very instant that we would
Mhm.
be here on this planet and then into eternity.
And then,
So yes,
look at that.
and I love the intricate work that he does. So
Yes, yes, the intricate. See, that's a good word, right? Absolutely.
uh-huh.
So when we think about like that, like he knew us before we were even formed in our
Yeah.
mother's womb and took his time and made us so
Mhm.
deliberately and wonderfully and layered. And I was like, all of those layers are important. And so that's
A-
what I feel like this
Absolutely.
series, this even with Birth and the Gifts, all of that, but particularly this platform is about that conversation, right?
Yes.
Is a conversation of how we came to know that
Uh-huh.
about how he created us and how we just cultivated it, nurtured it, and just become attuned with it and just letting it manifest and
Yeah,
continuing to do that, right? Like
absolutely.
that's what it's
Absolutely.
about. So let's maybe use that. We'll use that analogy, maybe keep coming back to that. So for you,
Okay.
when do you feel like either you discovered, realized, or had any kind of inkling of this is a part of my onion, or this is a part of how maybe God created me, and however you thought about it at that time. So that may not have been the language you used at that time, but like any bit of connection with ministry, mental health, social work, like anything you felt was relevant to who you were.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to back it all the way
Okay.
up,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because it'll lead us to that point, because the point that I understood where I was destined in life as a career began in the ninth grade, but that wasn't what led me to the ninth grade, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad that you said that. So periodically,
Mhm.
LaVerne, I may highlight that, right? Because people may have that same experience to know that this is maybe when it kind of formed, if I'm understanding you right, sort of like
Yes,
into a vocation sort of thing,
yes,
into a path.
yes,
But there were all these little pieces along the way that even got you
right.
to that realization. So hopefully, I always want like if parents are listening, educators to kind of know that all of those seeds, even when they're pre-K or before, that's important. And then sort of having some sense of who they are, what matters to them, what's important. So that maybe like for you, when you get to ninth grade, it kind of started to come together. So definitely rewind it for us and talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, and so I was born, in the last century. It
Okay.
reminds me of telling my mother she was, well, asking her what was it like in the olden
In the
days.
olden days.
And so I was in the first class that was desegregating the junior high schools. That's what it was called here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And that was grades 7 through 9. At the time, I had no idea I was going to desegregate a school, no desire to really, although some of the schools, the students I interviewed later on, years later, said they were asked and their parents prepared them and all of that. So at any rate, let me just go back a little bit later and say that's how I got to a junior high school in the seventh grade that was all white, and I was the only African American student there. Before that, so I'm just going back. Before that,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say I'm the firstborn in
Mm-hmm.
my family, born to my mother and dad. And so there was no one in that sibling group to explain to me what it was going to be like to desegregate, because we were the first students of that time to do that. Although several years earlier, of course, Central High School was desegregated. Those students were a number of years ahead of us, and I didn't really have exposure to them at the time. Um,
Well, LaVerne, can I just clarify something? So for folks that's listening, so when we think about desegregation, we're talking about Arkansas, Central Arkansas, Little Rock. Um, Now, was it, just for clarification, the Central High um, desegregation that occurred in 1957? That was the first phase, right? So now the first phase of desegregation in the schools. And now what you're talking about is the second phase. Is that right?
Thank you for mentioning that. You
Yeah.
remember that I identified it in a book we'll talk about later,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not. Phase one of the desegregation plan uh, for uh, for the Little Rock, Pulaski County, Little Rock's public schools was desegregation of the high schools.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the African Americans who uh, had entered into a lawsuit wanted all of the schools to desegregate at the same time. So the plan that was developed and approved by the court system was that if things went well in 1957 and subsequent years in the high schools, then the junior high schools would desegregate in 1960.
Okay.
Well, the schools did not desegregate in 1960 because Governor Faubus closed the schools in 1958 due
Right.
to what he decided was not a successful time period. He wanted to keep them closed. He was not allowed to keep them closed for the following year. But needless to say, the desegregation plan was pushed back and so 1961, which was the year that I desegregated, there were 5 schools. So I was in a group of students who were selected by the school board to desegregate the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
then we desegregated those schools. One school was not desegregated. One junior high was not desegregated in 1961, and that was because no African American students were identified to
Okay.
desegregate that. So my sister Kathleen Bell
Mm-hmm.
uh, was then identified along with one other student in 1962 to
Okay.
desegregate Pulaski Heights Junior High School. So she had one. We lived in the same um, house. We lived in the same room,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they placed her at Pulaski Heights. And
Mm-hmm.
so the same thing happened when it was time for us to go to high school, for me to go to high school, and for her to come over. We lived same house, same room, and they sent her to Central and sent me to a year earlier to Hall High School. So at any rate, uh, going back to that, I want to just bring in the other part of me in that
Mm-hmm.
situation was I was raised in a family. The extended family was extremely important, and the family group. a large number of us who lived in Little Rock attended the same church. And
Hmm.
that was a wonderful experience. And so I received a lot of support at that church from family. And they showed a lot of love. And then even the family who were not blood related were fictive kin. And so they provided support to me as well. And some of them, one lady even sewed my clothes for me to wear to junior high school, Miss
Hmm.
Fitzpatrick, who I don't know if you even were born when.
I don't know. I know the name. I've heard the
Yeah,
name for sure. Yeah.
but at any rate, she sewed my clothes, and one lady, Miss Holiday, I know you don't know her, did my hair. She owned a beauty shop on Ninth Street when it was when there was a Ninth Street, and
Mhm.
at any rate, I was sent to Forest Heights Junior High School.
Okay.
Not a good experience. So do you
Mm.
want to say something
Yeah,
before I
let
move
me
to
kind
that?
of ask about that. Yeah, because you mentioned extended family, which is very important in a lot of
Yeah,
cultures, but particularly the Black culture, right? So that's very important. People outside of kind of your immediate family who may, I guess, live in your house with you, but all the aunts and uncles and all of that kind of thing, and cousins and older cousins and people
yes,
who are just like family, and then of course your church who you said provided. I just want to highlight the word supports, provided love. So I guess what I want to do is, and maybe you could talk about that as you talk about your experience at Forest
mhm,
Heights. But what I want to do is kind of in your talking is to talk about how you feel like kind of how words let's see how to word this, how you feel like that may have been helpful or impacted you, right? Because I feel like in our journey we have, and what I want to highlight in this series is kind of like the ebbs and flows of people
mhm,
birthing their gifts, kind of the
mhm,
duality, kind of, if you will, right? That's, if you think about it, that sounds positive in some ways, like
mhm,
people birthing their gifts, but it can be so many things and
mhm,
so many experiences that come with people birthing their gifts. So I guess I wanted you, as you move through, maybe talking about that, like
mhm,
talking about like where that showed up and how that
mhm,
was helpful, so people know that as you birth your gifts, one, there could can be people in your life or situations that can support you, and then other
mhm,
people know how to support people as their birth, especially children, as they are birthing their gifts, right? So hopefully that makes sense to kind of talk about
I
that,
think
because I would
so.
imagine, like, what if that wasn't there? If the extended family was not helpful, if there was not a church kind of context, right? Like, then how would that have been different? So yeah.
I really believe that you hit on something extremely, extremely important. If we don't even move past this part, I think that this is a critical part. Uh, a biological family as well as the extended family, which for me included the church community, was
Mm,
very important. We, my siblings and I grew up. There were five below me in a household that was pretty much authoritarian. And so there was not a lot of opportunity, as even though there was a closeness, a connectedness in different ways, but there was not a lot of opportunity to ask questions and get feedback and all of that. There were a lot of stressors going on. I learned later my dad was the only Black medical technician. He was the first Black at a VA. So he had his own stressors. He was a veteran and all of that. And my mother was a teacher initially all across the state of Arkansas because it took a long time for Black teachers to have a place in Little Rock. So meant those who were not born and raised in Little Rock, and my mother was not, sometimes taught in different places. So they met, but
mm,
had their own stresses going on along the way of having six children. Our church
mm,
community was extremely supportive in many ways. And they had expectations for us. So in the ways that they were supportive, they would, call us honey or baby or those kinds of things, or they would expect for us to do things, including my aunt. Keep in mind, if we were the first to desegregate, they had a certain level of education. But also remember, if I'm born in 1949, the generations behind me didn't get much education at all. And
Mm,
so they were the children of people who were slaves or who were just coming out of the sharecropping or those kinds of things. But so they couldn't help me to understand what I would be facing, in other words.
mhm,
But
mhm.
they could say, you can do it,
Right.
those kinds of things.
Mhm,
And that's what they did.
mhm,
Also, the expectations were extremely important. And I taught as a pastor, just retired. I talked with children and I talked with the grandparents who are usually at the church nowadays about the fact that, those Easter speeches, those Christmas speeches, those expectations that we have for our children to come and say a speech. Are so critical for their future development. They're
mhm,
leading the service on a certain day, youth day or whatever. They don't have too many opportunities to do that before they grow on up and move away to a different place. And so this is their birthplace for their gifts. That's what I believe. So
mhm.
was I was teaching a Sunday school class. I didn't know all the ins and outs. I certainly didn't know my doctrine at age 14, but I was doing that
Oh. At
vacation.
14, you were teaching Sunday school class.
Absolutely.
Oh. Oh.
Absolutely. And so I was doing things that, in larger churches, in larger Black churches, even, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. So we would do that in Sunday school or vacation Bible school at our small church. But back in those days, uh, we would leave one vacation Bible school and then go to another one. So
Mhm,
I
mhm,
would be at another bigger church. The one that we attended was either Mount Zion or Mount Pleasant here in the city of Little Rock. And
mhm,
we would be involved on a much larger scale. And the teachers there many times were also teachers. So, by the way,
mhm.
my mother and aunt in that church were also teachers. And so
Okay, yeah. So
their
educators
expectations,
running the family.
expectations were high,
Yeah.
right? And
Interesting.
so,
So if you could talk
yeah,
about that for a minute though, Laverne, is like so we're still kind of talking about we're still like in teenage years, right?
uh-huh,
Adolescent years,
uh-huh,
how all of that is very important. And you're giving us context, historical context, personal context, family, church context to help us to understand. Do you think is anything about those experiences, particularly teaching in Sunday school at 14, that potentially either, I don't know how you would understand it, but it either stirred up something in your gifts or any
mhm,
like, do you feel like
mhm,
was it something you were reluctant to do? Were you like
mhm.
excited about it? If you could talk about that and talk about if it stirred it up, did it awaken it? What did you think it did to your gift
Yeah,
package?
I think
Yeah.
using something you said earlier, it was planting seeds because,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, later I became an associate at the end of my retirement time, at the end of my professional experience, and an associate professor at a university. I
Mm-hmm.
was a pastor, and I'm still a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those seeds were planted at the time when I was very young uh,
Mm-hmm.
in uh, Mount Harmony Baptist Church. All of
Mm-hmm.
those seeds were being planted and being reinforced. You can do it, you can do it, those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things. So I want
Mm-hmm.
to jump just before I forget because I started something I didn't finish. So when I entered Forest Heights Junior High, that was an alienating experience. And
Mhm.
so I wasn't used to not being supported, but very much
Mhm.
so I was not supported in that school. I'm not going to go into details about that. I'll just say there were uh, only like one or two exceptions. One being in music, where I didn't have to be supported. I was reinforced in a sense of sanctuary. Peace was given
Mhm.
to me in the choir when I was able to
Mhm.
be there. But one day when I was in our civics class in the ninth grade, I took a Cooter, Kuder preference test.
Mhm.
And that was a kind of a career test to see where you're going to head or where your gifts are in a sense,
Mhm.
what you're interested in. And I scored 98% for social work.
Oh,
Uh-huh,
wow.
98 out of 100% for social.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so let's take that back to the family just a little bit. And you were talking
Mhm.
about the family and
Mhm.
strengths that we have. So
Mhm.
I was wondering, what in the world is social work? I knew that my phrase then and in a lot of ways now is I want to make the world a better place to live. So for
Mhm.
people to live because of the experiences that I had. And so in our family though, I said, well, who is a social worker? How can I find out what a social worker does? I didn't have to look beyond my first cousin, Gloria
Mhm.
Tender, who happened to be a social worker. And so I love our family, and I know and recognize that all families are not blessed this way, but all families, many families have strengths. Some
Mhm.
have more strengths than others, and some have some strengths, and you just have to search for them, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so our family has many strengths in that we all tend to have some fairly stringent expectations, and we all tend to move towards and past that
Mhm.
bar, whatever
Mhm.
bar is. And so Gloria was able to explain to me how social workers do help people and
Mhm.
how they're able to reach people on an individual level or at a meso level, a
Mhm.
smaller, level in terms. Um, I want to say on the family level, the community level, and then in the larger macro level across
Mhm.
organizations and systems and all of that. She was able to explain it in her own way. And
Mhm.
so I said to myself, well, now I see why I scored 98%.
Wow, wow.
You
So it all
know,
lined up. Like, okay, that
uh,
makes sense. This is all tracking.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I wanted to go back to kind of finish that question that you asked me
Hmm.
originally, but that also
Yeah.
set me along the line later on for not just doing social work, but because I was still very much connected to the Christian community. And then later on, as a parent, raising my children and working with them in their classes, and then ultimately working with children in the church. I was thinking, I don't know all of the things I need to know to help them. And so
Hmm.
I want to learn a little bit more. Lo and behold, I wound up with two Christian organizations, one being a seminary and one being a fully evangelistic organization for children. So,
Wow. So it seems like it was all connected to still going back to you want to make the world a better place for people to live. It all goes
absolutely,
back to that. And what can it seems like in the end, it definitely quite a bit of work with children. So it's like, what will equip me to be able to do this? It
yes.
seems. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I
Yeah.
follow up with something on Laverne? Because, and I'm going to honor the fact that you said not a lot of detail about things at Forest Heights. I will encourage people. I was just actually reviewing the book, The First 25, your book, your book, where they can read and kind of better understand some of the details of certain people's experiences during that time. Um, and so, and if I could ask this, so this is maybe more at a higher level conversation
Mhm,
regarding that, but I think about, I'm going to frame it this way. We think about post-traumatic growth or post-traumatic wisdom, and like this idea of, not to say, and I don't want to say, not to say that God puts trauma on us. I don't believe that, or that we need to go through trauma to grow and have wisdom. So I'm not, promoting that way of thinking. What I am saying is, when we go through things, then basically how can it all come together for our good? If that's a way to say it. That's just the words I'm using. But would you say it was anything about that experience in that context? Okay, like in that context, that made you who you are in terms of birthing your gifts, in terms of with social work? I don't know if that even came from it, to say, you know what, something, this is making me want to, like, instead of it defeating you so much so where it quenched, somehow it didn't quench. It sounds like that kind of idea you had in your head, that I want to make the world a better place for people. Like, is that what it produced? I don't know. Hopefully that's clear what the question
mhm,
is.
mhm.
But like, yeah, what would you say
Yeah.
about that?
Yes, I would say that there are a lot of things along that line that helped me to eventually blossom more as an adult. But along the way, um, there were a lot of cuts, hurts, bruises, because some of the things that I missed out on were like being accepted as an African American. Instead of that, I would receive a lot of shame. People would not want to be around me. I'm not going to, again, go into a lot
Yeah.
of detail, but being African American in an all-white school, and I can also imagine for Caucasian Americans, because for us there were just two races, except for there were some Jews as an ethnicity in that particular school as well. So this school was predominantly very well-to-do, and they were white. Um, to me, they were all white. And
Mm,
so, in that context, that particular scene, as well as later in life, I entered that school. But I entered that school not having a good sense of who I am, even though I was raised in that church setting and in other areas. I was raised not feeling very good about myself. I was raised to, as the firstborn, to take care of the young ones and to make
mm,
sure that they were okay. And if you don't do your best, you're not, living up. So there are some things to say about the expectations that are put there. And I was raised also to just make sure that I would not fall out of whatever line of expectation there was supposed to be. So
mhm.
I'm a good rule follower.
Okay.
But
Okay.
at the time, I also wanted to be accepted. I also wanted
Mhm,
to be seen. Many children want to be seen as a friend to everybody, and
mhm,
in group and all of that. And I didn't even have that in elementary school, which was our all black school, just simply because you're not always everybody's friend, and there are
mhm,
always different ways to define who's in and who's out and those kinds of things. So even if I had always attended a black school, I would not have always been in. Part of it, ironically, was because of the fact that I could do some things faster, such as reading or writing or those kinds of things. Not math, but I
Okay.
could learn some things a little bit faster. So that set me apart
Mm,
in those circles, and people didn't care for that.
mm,
Uh, fast forward, um, when by the time I made it to junior high school, that was reinforced, not
mm,
being accepted. So I looked
mhm,
later in life for acceptance in high school. I enjoyed it because there were more Black people there, a whole five more Black people, well,
yeah.
in my class, but not in my individual classes, and
Mhm,
12 altogether in the school. And so I enjoyed that. But I had not learned much about how to get along in different spaces, in different places. And so consequently, I placed some bruises on myself by making choices that were not the best for me.
mhm,
Even as I was succeeding well at going off to college, going off to graduate school, going later into the first jobs, I was still learning how to grow up. So I would say that part of my trauma be- came about, part of it was self-induced
mhm,
by not knowing how to socialize and how to make wise decisions, wise choices, and those kinds of things. So as a parent, I would talk with parents about making sure that you're preparing your child for
mhm,
the larger community, making sure that you are helping them learn to make decisions, even at
mhm,
a younger age, helping them to learn how to problem solve, learn how to wait for different kinds of things. I think you and I had a waiting conversation the other day talking about
mhm.
young people perhaps missing out on that, learning how to wait for
Right.
things to come to them instead of going out, snatching
Mhm.
it, grabbing it before times. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think as I grew later, then those traumas that you're talking about, I realized some of the things that did happen to me as a result of the experiences that I had, and some that I heaped on myself, uh, became helpers to
Mm,
help me to learn how to navigate the world, as well as to prepare others to do the same.
mm.
And
I
so,
see.
whether it was parenting, because I was a parent at a young age, whether it was learning how to work in a mental health field with people who experienced many of the same challenges that I did, but far beyond mine as well, or whether it was students later on in school who needed to learn how to make decisions about, just even how to write a paper, or think through how to
Mhm.
research, or not to settle for, well, I can pick it up and paraphrase it and put it in my paper, or,
Right.
kinds of.
Right.
So the
Yeah, so
things,
very important skills, it seems like you're saying, problem
yeah.
solving skills, decision making skills,
Hmm.
parenting
Hmm.
skills, how to creatively navigate
Hmm.
education or whatever aspect of life.
Right,
But can you
right,
unpack this, Aunt Laverne? Because I think what I've seen, what I've experienced personally, but also in being a therapist and walking alongside people who are essentially, really what it sounds like you're talking about is how you turned your pain into purpose, right? Like it was pain, it was hurt, and how can now this be turned into purpose that you
right,
realize you probably had at least back in ninth grade, if not
right.
before. So if you could even talk about, like, even if you were to, like, I'm trying to think of something real practical when somebody is really experiencing the pain, and it's like they're at the crossroads of really where this pain could just lead them down a spiral of just
Mhm.
ooh, that'll be hard to come back from, of where
Right.
it's not turned into purpose. It's just like really self-destructive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is like, well, it doesn't have to be either or, but it could feel like it, or like now how can I just really like really come out of this and really heal from this pain and move in more of a positive direction? How would you say you did that? How did it not go into the self-destructive path? Like what was it? Were there any tools, technique? I mean, like what happened to help you kind of keep persisting, really?
Well, I think for one thing, when I was going down that destructive path, I realized that I had wandered away from where the Lord was taking me. So
Okay.
I think as I found my way, even though I was always in church, when I
Mm-hmm.
realized that it was just church I was in, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
a relationship with God, I think
Uh,
that truly helped me to understand that it's not about just going to church, that is
mm-hmm.
going to make a difference. It's about allowing my relationship with Him to give me purpose, to give me hope, to give me peace, that it wasn't going to be another person that was going to give me peace. It wasn't going to be someone who was going to come in and rescue me. I'm it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I realized that, it also helped me to realize, Kyla, I'll just have to say, well, how I got from grades 7 to grades 9 in that junior high school. That was determination. So I had hope in the Lord and I had determination. And
Mm-hmm.
then the more information that I got, one of the reasons that I really believe that social work was the right profession for me was it helped me to understand how people learn to make poor decisions and poor choices and how they were uh, basing their behavior on faulty information that they
Mm-hmm.
received, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if this was what they thought that was their foundation, and the foundation was shaky, then they would continue to make
Mm-hmm.
poor decisions based on those faulty or distorted thoughts that they had. And so I really believe that I was led to social work to help to straighten me out because I was working with individuals and families and all of that. But I had to do that also for me from
Mm-hmm.
learning how to relate to God and have that intimate personal relationship with Him. I realize a lot of people don't have that. But if I had not started out early in life in
Mm-hmm.
that foundation, I don't know where I would be right now. So,
Wow.
a
So the
lot of
foundation is
people,
critical. Yeah, that's what
absolutely,
I'm hearing you say. The foundation is critical. So,
absolutely.
and it sounds like just so people are listening, they say I didn't have the best foundation. God is
Mhm.
still faithful, right? Like they
Right,
can still move
right,
along and still learn and
right.
grow and transform and all of those things. It's just you're saying in your experience, your foundation
Yeah,
really was critical and is a foundation that was set by maybe imperfect people,
right,
and at the same time, it was
right.
still set.
And
Mm,
so, so it's important to understand
mhm,
for many people because I work with people who have already messed up. Okay, so
mhm,
in the
mhm,
agency where I work with individuals and couples whose children are generally in foster care settings
okay.
because of some decisions that they made. So we start with today. You know,
Mhm,
when I was volunteering, going to the prison with a group of people to do the reentry program, I said, yes, this is what your past was. Let us begin with today.
mhm,
Because you
mhm,
can't go back and undo all of that has occurred in the past. That might have been uh, something you did, we all know, again, there were things that happened to us, perhaps that our parents did or somebody else did, our
Mm-hmm.
boyfriends, husbands, all of those kinds of things did.
Mm-hmm.
But what am I going to do about it? And I think that was one thing my mother used to point out. I don't care about what everybody else did. What did you do? So let's
Mm-hmm.
start with today, looking at what I did, take responsibility for that,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is a crucial part. Take responsibility for
Yeah.
your behavior
Yep.
as you learn how to think clearly and move forward. So
Absolutely.
some of the skills that I teach today are
Mm-hmm.
about helping them to look at their decision-making process instead of operating on, I feel this, or she did that, or he did that,
Mm-hmm.
or it's their fault, or whatever. What about you?
Yeah,
So,
and what can you do to I love it. I'm
mhm,
a both and person, so I do believe because there's some people I work with where it's hard for them to move past that. And
mhm,
one of the things that I like about a certain therapy approach, dialectical behavior therapy, and other therapies, I doubt that is unique to DBT,
mhm,
but
mhm,
this idea of how to help people to understand that they may not, and you can tell me whether you agree with this. Not everybody may agree with it. I don't know, but that we may not be responsible for some aspects of how we got where we are. Like if there are some biological predispositions where there were traumas that occurred to us or happened around us that
mhm,
were not our fault, not our responsibility. So, and to validate the experiences, the emotions, and all of what
mhm,
led up to that, that is crucial. And
mhm.
at the same time, helping people understand now you are responsible for, like you said, today. And how can we
Right.
move forward today with our behavior? So it's validation of what they're not responsible for, and also acknowledging now you are responsible for your healing going forward and your decisions going
Yes, so from my standpoint, and when I
forward.
was doing my PhD, my primary mode that I learned had to do with family of origin, family
Mhm.
system therapy, and all of that intergenerational family
Yeah.
therapy, and a lot of that has to do with looking at all of the intricate components of that system. What contributors
Mm-hmm.
to your system took place even long before you were born. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
let's go back to, was there substance abuse, or was there in the family violence? Is there some medical problem or
Mm-hmm.
biochemical reaction? We look at all of those things. And as you just said, those are things that you can't say, well, I did this or I did that. But then we look at that and we see how those contribute to the individual's life.
Right.
And then we look at, and then what did you contribute as a
Right.
result of that? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, I'm glad that you pointed it out. I don't start at the now. I do start at the psychosocial history
Mm-hmm.
so that I
Mm-hmm.
can see that, and included in that is the trauma history.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Mm-hmm.
includes all of that, as well as the social system, the family
Mm-hmm.
history that was going on, the strengths as well as the deficits
Yeah.
that took place. And so I think all of that makes us who we are, as
Mm-hmm.
you just took me through in this interview. But we have to look at, so where do we go from here after
Mm-hmm.
having an understanding? Because it's
Yes.
about choice.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you and I know as a therapist is we can't tell a person what to do. As a result of all the information they receive, they still
Mm-hmm.
have the choice of doing something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what God does too, by the
Yeah.
way.
That's exactly what I was thinking when you said that.
That's what
Is
God
that
does.
well we all
It's
have
free
free will.
will. Free will. He tried to tell Adam and Eve That didn't work. He tried to tell Cain, and look at what Cain did.
Hmm.
So, well, some people might not know, so you have to go back to Genesis 4 and look at all of that. So, but
So
anyway,
since the beginning of the time, since the beginning of the time, even with the Lord, we've had
I
free
see,
will.
yeah.
So that, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
saying God was a counselor and look at that. But you
Hmm.
see, when I'm talking with individuals or with families, then I'm working with them to help them consider there's some other ways of looking at things.
Hmm.
There are other ways of considering how to manage your emotions,
Hmm.
and there are other ways to make decisions so that you can have a more successful, more long lasting outcome. And I
Hmm.
think that that has been helpful for some of the families that I see. I also know that it was helpful for me to consider as I stopped spinning around in my own stuff and realize, okay, there's got to be a different way of doing things. And so
Hmm.
I have found that to be helpful in my life, whether it's as a pastor, whether it's as a professor, whether it's as a therapist, a parent, grandparent, all of those kinds of things.
Wow, I think that that is wonderful. And I like how you just brought it back to those different hats that you wear, right? Like, even if we started what you said, I love that what you said, like, I want to make the world a better place for people to live, right? And it seems like as you move along, certainly through your social work identity and all that you've done in that, I mean, Aunt Laverne, it sounds like you've done that. You've done that. You're continuing to do that because you still operate as a social worker, as a therapist, and doing all the things that you do. So for individuals, for families, for communities, it sounds like you definitely have done and are doing that. So look at that, like going back to kind of your way of thinking back in when you were a teenager. It,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
when you're doing it. I think that's just amazing to, I don't know, I think that's just what God wants. I just believe that. Like that's what God wants us to somehow
Uh-huh.
at some point be able through a test, be it
Uh-huh.
through something somebody else realized some way or another, get in that, oh, this is the thing. This is, and it's not even not just one thing, but this is one thing, at least
Uh-huh.
something that, and then connecting with that. And here we are years later, and
Yeah.
and that's what you're doing, and that's what you're able to talk about. I think that's
Absolutely.
wonderful.
One last thing I was going to add when you were saying that when my son started in the accounting field, I have two children, well, two offspring. They're grown and have their own grown children. But at any rate, my son used to ask me, Mama, what's it like to love what you do? Well,
Mm.
I'm blessed to love what I do. This is year 51, and it's been a blessing all the way. All the things that I do, I love what I do. And I'm just so glad that the Lord God allowed me to see it at such a
Mhm.
young age to be able to
Mhm.
do it
Mhm.
from being young all the way to this time, because there are various aspects we didn't even talk about that come to
Yeah.
my mind. Yeah, so I'm grateful and thank you for uh, putting it to voice today.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I agree. As we've been talking, I mean the time is just flying, but as we've been talking, it made me realize, man, it's probably numerous other aspects of your journey and your process in birthing your gifts that we can talk about. And I'm pretty sure folks have heard she's talked about being a professor, you've talked about being a pastor. So there are clearly other kind of aspects of your journey that we can unpack and get into. But it seems like what the glue that holds it all together in each of those, you were doing something that made the world a better place for people to live in, right? Helping them, be it through education, be it through in the ministry context, be it in your family context, as being a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, a great aunt, all those things. So many different people, but then also a therapist being in that capacity as well. So what do you see for yourself next? I know you're transitioned from the pastoral role, and you say you're still a therapist. What do you kind of see? Any kind of goals you have for yourself, not just professional goals, right? Life goals, anything you see for yourself that's up next.
Well, I am in the waiting period right now, part of that, and I'm in prayer with the Lord, and I'm okay with that. I've already done some things I never thought that I would do, even recently. And so I'm excited to see where the Lord is leading me in this area. But I do know from a therapeutic standpoint that I will still be seeing clients. I would love to, I think I mentioned it to you, I would love to provide supervision for people who are just beginning the field, because I think it's important for those of us who are elders to impart. I'll just use wisdom for lack of a better word, but techniques, skills, knowledge, all of those kinds of things to future generations, like I was doing when I was teaching in the School of Social Work, or helping people along that way. But as from a personal standpoint, my grandchildren probably they're still saying they're not going to have any children yet. They're all grown, but we so I probably won't reach that great grandmama stage. So I'll just spend time with them. They'll just have to look forward to seeing more of me with
Okay.
them, as well as with my son and his wife and my daughter and her husband. Will just enjoy that time. I'm also, as you know, my siblings and I are very close. So we plan on traveling. We'll be traveling in a
Excellent.
couple of weeks
Mhm,
to different places. And
mhm,
so I like that aspect. But part of me, some people say I do social work. I am a social worker. So that's what
mhm,
I am. Play
mhm,
therapist and all of those kinds of things will still be a part of who I am. And
mhm,
I do hope, even in the ministry area, to get back to what I used to do years ago. I mentioned it
mhm,
earlier, is do children's church, and I
mhm,
hope to begin to do one, even in the current church where I pastored. The new
mhm,
pastor has said, oh, he would love to have that. And so I will
awesome.
be staying there and opening our children's church. I hope to train new people coming in to do
Mhm,
children's church so that I can
mhm,
see, see how they do it. Uh,
right.
Given the fact that I won't be there forever, I want to
Mhm,
make sure that we
mhm,
have it up and going, because we know that young people will need that. And then the
mhm,
other part that I'll be doing, continuing to do, is at an elementary school there, we have a Good News Club, which is part of
mhm,
Child Evangelism Fellowship. We did not get a chance to touch on this, so I'm just going to say it very succinctly. I
mhm,
like to reach the child as young as possible to help to
mhm,
put a footprint there, help them to know how to love the Lord, and to have their
mhm,
beginning, and to receive them. And at our elementary school, we're able to teach them about the Lord and grow in the Lord. Some of them are already saved, and then some come to Christ. We've had over
mhm.
14 children
Oh,
in the
wow.
past several years to accept the Lord as their Savior,
Mhm,
and then others to continue growing. So that's a part of what I do, as well as tutoring. I do the tutoring, actually now is reading to the children that are in
mhm,
pre-K. I like to get them again as young as possible. So you see how that reinforces
mhm,
what I told you earlier, because the children, if they know that they're loved,
mhm,
and by me, loved by God, loved by the safe elders,
mhm,
they can't have a better beginning.
mhm.
So I want to give them a good start in their life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it seems like that goes back to that foundation, right? And knowing like Because it seems like what you focused on was their relationship with God, and then maybe in a church community, right? Like those being separate, right? Like even if they're not in a church community, they still have that foundation, hopefully, of their relationship with God. They can have a foundation educationally, ideally within their family as well. So many different even institutions, groups, organizations that could serve
Mhm,
as just a sturdy, hopefully a sturdy and
mhm,
durable foundation.
right.
So I love that. So you've been doing it all along, and I like how you said, because sometimes when people are in different, I would say just kind of, I don't know, kind of at parts of their life where they are going to another chapter. I like how
Mhm,
you said that you're excited. I kind of wrote that down. You're in prayer and you're kind of excited to see. So people will know, like, how do I wait? What does waiting look like when I'm kind of about to go into a new thing?
mhm,
Right? So you can wait in prayer, you can wait in excitement, you can wait in hope, even though at the same time, it can also be sometimes it may make you a little nervous or
uh-huh,
something like that, but still make that your kind of stance of this is how I'm going to go about this. And it seems like you're going to continue to do the work. You got to continue to do the work.
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
love that. I love that, LaVerne. I love that. Um, Thank you again. Any other thing? And I know we could maybe even have a part two later. I don't know because there's some things I know we did not get into. But I'm glad you went back and kind of took that back to the foundation and kind of setting that foundation and working with the young people in various capacities where you can do that in ways that that can be done. Anything else you want to kind of leave the people with? Any nugget of wisdom or anything like that? Anything you just want to share?
Well, the last thing that I want to say today, because I could talk a lot, but the last thing that I want to say today, beyond, thank you so much for having me here,
Mm,
because I really enjoyed this experience, and that time has really flown by.
mm.
I'm mindful of the fact that when I was working in children's church years and years ago in the Baptist church, one young man had parents who came to church. And they said, well, we're just tired of you. And I said, why? And they said, because our son is making us come to church. so, so that we could get him here on time. And they fell out laughing. And then I was
Oh,
reminded
that's funny.
that a- again, we're teaching in the Good News Club. One of our helpers there said that they attended an event at a different school, and one of our students came to them and hugged them, and the parent came up and she said that my child has made me go back to church.
Wow.
So
Wow.
sometimes we think that
Mhm,
the parent is the one who will make the change, and
mhm.
sometimes that's not the
Sometimes not.
case.
Mhm,
Sometimes that's not the case. We think that the child has less power than anybody else, but those changes are incremental in that system, in that family system. And
mhm,
change can take place anywhere along the way. So I want to encourage your audience to really think about, this may be where I am, but change can begin with me, and
mhm.
change can continue to spread.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Love maybe people can say that could be a whole affirmation, right? Change can continue with me and continue to spread like we can just in the smallest of ways.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Laverne. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. It's been another edition of Birthing the Gifts. It's a process conversation series. Again, thank you for joining today. Have a wonderful day.